It is a time of legend. The galaxy is in flames. The Emperor's glorious vision for humanity is in ruins. His favorite son, Horus, has turned from his father's light and embraced chaos. His armies, the mighty and redoubtable Space Marines, are locked in a brutal civil war. Once these ultimate warriors fought side by side as brothers, protecting the galaxy and bringing mankind back into the Emperor's light. Now they are divided. Some remain loyal to the Emperor, whilst others have sided with the War Master. Preeminent amongst them, the leaders of their 1,000-strong legions are the Primarchs. Magnificent, superhuman beings, they are the crowning achievement of the Emperor's genetic science. Thrust into battle against one another, victory is uncertain for either side. Worlds are burning. At Istan 5, Horus dealt a vicious blow, and 3 loyal legions were all but destroyed. War was begun, a conflict that will engulf all mankind in fire. Treachery and betrayal have usurped honor and nobility. Assassins lurk in every shadow. Armies are gathering. All must choose a side or die. Horus musters his armada, Terra itself the object of his wrath. Seated upon the golden throne, the Emperor waits for his wayward son to return. But his true enemy is chaos, a primordial force that seeks to enslave mankind to its capricious whims. The screams of the innocent, the pleas of the righteous resound to the cruel laughter of dark gods. Suffering and damnation await all should the Emperor fall and the war be lost. The end is here. The skies darken, colossal armies gather. For the fate of the throne world, for the fate of mankind itself, the siege of Terra has begun.
The Praetorian's name was Rogel Dawn. His armor was of gold. His hair was shocking white. His sculpted face was as severe as any patriarch from mankind's long history. There was no room for compromise in his expression. Sanguinius, the angel, was named. He was garbed in gold as bright as dawn's panoply. His armor covered all his body save his face and his snow-white wings. He was beautiful. A divine being incarnate, pulled down from heaven and exiled in the soiled world of men. He observed the universe sadly. The Warhawk wore gleaming white. His adopted people called him Jagatai Khan, the first name given for his prowess, the latter because he was their king. He kept the name. Like his brothers, he went without his helm. Below a tall topknot, his face was proud, wild and always on the verge of a smile, but troubled, like the sky at summer's end edged with autumn clouds. He sought out death simply for the joy of laughing at it.
Midnight, as the old reckoning has it,
said the Khan.
The symbolic spear cast. Our brother marks his enmity for us. It is a challenge. It is a promise of his victory. We did this on Chogoris, when armies met. This shot is meant for the 3 of us.
Such arrogance,
said Sanguinius softly.
Horus was well gifted with confidence. It has grown wayward. He is too sure of himself.
The Khan shrugged, as if Horus's fall had been an inevitability. His glorious armor hissed and sighed. Dawn turned his gaze to the War Master's armada. Not since the Principa Imperialis had mustered at the opening of the Great Crusade had such a fleet of void ships gathered over Terra, and never before had so many come as enemies. Terra's iron children returned to their origin with murder in their hearts, to spit hatred onto the cradle of mankind, and yet, for the moment, they held back. weathering the storm of explosives and violent energies hurled at them from the ground. A snaggle shell fell upon the shields.
Why do you wait?
Dawn said quietly. The ramparts of the Bab Bastion were empty, except for the three brothers. The question he uttered for the sake of speaking, for recently he felt himself falling too often into silence.
Come to us. Break yourself upon our walls.
He waits no more,
said Sanguinius. His voice, once melodious, was strained.
It begins.
He lifted his hands and pointed. The sky sparkled 1 billion times as every ship in the fleet spoke together. The Emperor will fall, the pattern of light seemed to say. We have come to wreak ruin.
Every war I have ever seen has hidden beauty,
said the Khan.
But I have seen few sights quite so entrancing as this.
A fleeting beauty,
said Dawn.
and deadly.
The shells hit upon the upper atmosphere, where they drew flaming lines through the sky.
All things are fleeting. Life is short and full of woe. One must wring every moment dry and drink in the experience it has to offer, good or bad.
The space above the palace was full of the downward arcs of munitions and the straight lines of las bursts stabbing upwards. The air shook with matter hurtling from the void. Booming reverberations echoed from the peaks of the Himalaysian Massif, resounding around the world, girdling it in sound even before the first shot detonated.
How can you see the good in this?
Sanguinius asked the Khan. As he turned to look to the Warhawk, the first shells burst over the sky orbital plate. The last of Terra's artificial satellites. It hung low to the horizon, near the inner palace, its wide arrays of grav engines labouring to keep it aloft. The munitions exploded harmlessly, their fury vented into the warp by void shields. The dome of the plate's protection aegis shone with baleful energies.
Joy is an act of defiance. With joy we win, even if we lose. To have lived well is a victory all in its own, for we all die. Death is unimportant to the laughing warrior. A poet makes tragedy glorious. That is why.
The shells hit the main shield seconds after hitting sky. The aegis was wrought with ancient knowledge, jealously harboured by the priests of Mars. The voids comprising the aegis reacted, and roofed the earth with fire. Storms of flame shot out from complex tangles of discharged lightning. The palace shuddered with the effort of buried machines, as halls of generators fought to hold back the bombardment from the spires of the city. Towers of nuclear fire roared skyward from every horizon. Tremors shook the very world as the first rounds of shells hit. The fleet's energy cannons awoke, hurtling shafts of burning light and streams of plasma down, so that the void shields danced, and the view of the ships was lost. The Emperor's Praetorian looked up into the inferno in the sky, his eyes focused somewhere past the fleet, deep into the hidden void, as if he could see beyond the bounds of the solar system and the material universe and out into the warp, where the fleets of Robute Gilliman made all haste to the throne world. His gauntlets gripped the lid of the parapet tightly.
We will not fall. We will stand,
he said with utmost certainty. He couldn't look. He wanted his first sight to be the inner sanctum of the Imperial Palace, the one his father had spoken of with such reverence. I look to the future. The grey dust of today's Terra is the past. That was what he had told his companions. When they asked why he closed his eyes, they smiled at his words. Horrors had a way with men. His self-deprecating jokes went down with hearty chuckles, and yet he was conscious to be kinder on his friends. He resisted looking out at the port views as the vessel shook upon re-entry, instead staring to meet the four companions beside him. I want to see what will be, not what has been, said Horus. Terra is old and used up, but it will be great again. The palace of the Emperor is the center of this change. From it authority shall spread. uniting mankind as one people for the first time in thousands of years. Why would I look upon the ruin of what is now? When one day the world shall live again, and thrill to new life return to it by the efforts of the highest power. When my father's work is done, and all of old Earth's glories are restored, then I shall look upon it fully. The roar of the engines quieted, as an altogether different wave of noise grew. The sounds of millions cheering. "They love you, my lord, they love you," said one of his companions. "They do not know me," said Horus. His smile began to fade for reasons lost to him. The 4 companions began to gently drag him down the gangplank. "Open your eyes," one of the companions whispered in his ear. Horus opened them, and for what he thought was boasting now became clear modesty. The Imperial Palace. The roar of the crowd in their millions, strewn across the half-constructed wonder. This was his father's, the Emperor's vision, and it was glorious. "It is overweening," said his second companion. "His understanding of history's flow is simplistic, and his project will fall. If it does, it will fall and rise again, as all things fall and rise," said the third. "It is beautiful," said the fourth. The first said nothing. Horus looked upon them and couldn't recall their names. The first had a warrior's ugliness, pitted and battered, his nose flat, shaved head scarred, forever on the edge of violence. The second was a scholar, waspish in temperament. Heterochromatic eyes looked calculatingly upon everything. His face shifted into uncertain shapes beyond the human form. The third was heavier than the rest, fully fleshed and jolly, yet flakes of skin at the corner of his mouth and red rims around his eyes displayed an imbalance in his humours. The fourth distracted him, slipping his slender hand back into Horus's own and leading him deeper into the palace. "My brother, my lord," he laughed. This one wore his hair in elaborate knots and coloured his cheeks. His eyes were bright with pleasure. "They adore you," he said. Horus and his companions walked a gleaming amber road, passing the sculptures and art the height of what human hands could produce. It was a half-finished city, smothered in freezing air, and yet it was beautiful. Horus strode toward a throne of gold, and even though the being upon it seemed to be but a man, and no gene-forged giant, he overfilled it, his presence spilling out in a blaze of light. So glaring, Horus had to narrow his eyes to keep walking forwards. His 4 companions hung back, afraid. Though they had seen the Emperor before and borne his presence bravely, this time they trailed after Horus like frightened children. He lost respect for them, there and then, that they never fully recovered. This was a lie, and the truth. This was almost exactly as his memory recalled the day he set foot upon Terra. But his companions were different then. They were Chthonian men. His first Mournival, perhaps the first mortal men of Chthonian to die of old age in generations. The cheers of the crowd soured in his eyes. Almighty Horus Lupercal, Saviour, Unifier, Hope of humanity. But he was a weapon, made by an oppressor. If his so-called father had commanded him, he would have killed every single one of them without a thought, and he would have made the massacre seem just as he had done for over 2 centuries. He looked around and saw nothing but arrogance, nothing but abasement to a god in waiting. "Can you not see what he is?" Horus shouted boldly. "He brings you slavery in the guise of liberation." But the words were not heard by the crowd. He could not affect the memory. Time is a river. It flows only where it can. It is bound by the laws as sure as that of gravity. Horus cheatingly followed the path before like a man can return to the river's source and walk its length again. It was only when he stepped out of the flow that father and son met again. Horus's spirit walked out of step with his former self. He looked through the back of his own head as his past and present moved out of synchronization. How naive he had been. How excited by this outpouring of affection. He had been taken in completely. He allowed himself to be angry about that. Horus watched his former self kneel and take the Emperor's pledge. How pitiful he looked then. War Master Horus looked up, while his weakling former self grovelled in the light, his mouth split far wider than any humans could, evincing a reptilian smile. "Hello, Father," he said. "It is not enough that you pursue me through metaphor and dreamscapes. Now you chase me down the roads of what has been," said the Emperor. "I will chase you where I must, Father," he replied. His smile spread. "You sound tired." Snow whipped past Horus from the shadows of a forest, hidden on the edge of sight. Lupine shapes prowled behind him, panting hot breaths. Eyes of red, green, pink and blue shining from the shadows. A light grew, and Horus peered up at the man on the throne. He saw 3 figures. A golden emperor, a man in pain holding back a great tide, and a corpse upon a throne. The War Master laughed and pushed back, drawing on the might of his allies. "I was weak. Now I am not," he said. The light dimmed. "The truth makes me strong. False strength derived from false truths," said the Emperor. "As you draw it, it eats you alive from inside. Drag upon their lies as much as you wish. You are not strong enough to come against me in this way, my wayward son, and you never shall be," said the Emperor. The temple existed in no plan of the vengeful spirit, but it was one of many changes the ship had undergone. As Horus's power grew, the War Master's flagship left behind no constraints of the materium, twisting itself away from its original form, to swirling patterns of shadow and warp taint. Pools of blood and desiccated scrolls that hurt to look at filled the chamber. Like the vessel, the War Master was no longer what he had once been, to Abaddon's eyes. Shadows whispered in Abaddon's ears, promising power, wealth and glory as they probed his soul for weakness. Lesser men would succumb, but Ezekiel Abaddon had no weakness. Contempt armored him. His will was a sword against the dark. "It is a throne room fit for the Lord of the primordial truth," said Layak. "It is a prison," said Abaddon. He looked upon his father. Horus's face had swollen with power, its beauty lost beneath stretched skin. When awake, Horus still possessed the legendary charisma that made all men love him. It angered Abaddon to see him so changed, and tainted his love with pity. He hated how he was forbade from killing Layak. "Horus rose to free us from one tyrant, not submit us to 4. He fights with them. He will not be beholden to your masters. Your certainty is weakness," said Abaddon. "The War Master is not a slave," said Layak, making no effort to hide his condescension. "He is the champion of the 4. The power of the eightfold path is his to command." "I do not trust you, Apostle," replied Abaddon. "I do not trust your words, or your faith or your intentions." "You have no idea, First Captain," Layak said. "What your father thinks or feels, you never will, until you allow yourself to worship as he does, and open yourself to the Pantheon." Abaddon grunted dismissively. He thought to Davin, when his father was on the brink of death, only to return stronger. Each time Horus fell, he came back. But now, each time he awoke from his dreamscape, he was diminished. Horus still believed himself master of his own destiny. To Abaddon, it was clear he no longer was. By running to the lodges and heeding Erebus, Abaddon bore some responsibility for that, and the thought prickled him. "Oh, Abaddon, does your love for your father waver? Do you see him vulnerable, and you feel regard curdle into disgust? He is not a weakling, I assure you. Abaddon turned so that he fully faced the apostle. Speak so of the War Master again, and I shall kill you here. Abaddon's body was on the precipice of violence. All it took was one command, one purge of these word-bearers, and his father could be whole. You would slaughter me, while I pay respect to your genes, sire, said Layak. I saved your life, First Captain. There is a cost to that. I saved yours too, if I recall. I owe you nothing. Abaddon bit back. Both Justerian and Layak's blade slaves prepared for combat. The tension thick. Abaddon swallowed his hate, and the room retracted its claws. When will he wake? Abaddon asked. He does not sleep, said Layak. Horus's affinity with the warp grows by the hour. His power swells. Layak clasped a strange staff in front of him and bowed his head. Pray with me, for Horus speaks to the Emperor. An hour passed before Layak raised his head. He returns to us, Layak whispered. The light circling Horus burst apart in flickers of witchfire. A moment later, Horus stirred. His eyelids flickered like those of a stupefied man coming around, showing only whites and refusing to open fully. Horus. Abaddon moved to his father. Layak's hand shot out and grasped his forearm. Do not touch him, he hissed. Horus mewed, pawing at the seat arms for support. Father, said Abaddon, appalled by the display of weakness. Horus held up his hands to silence his son. I am well, my son. Do not be afraid, said Horus. You disgrace yourself with your fretting, First Captain. Nothing ails me. Far from it. He lied. Abaddon couldn't mask his disgust, but it faded as the strength returned to Horus. He stood tall and proud, and finally Abaddon thought, there was the future Emperor of mankind. Why do you disturb my meditations? Why are you not on your ship, Abaddon? Said the War Master. I wish to see you myself, my lord, said Abaddon. Energy beat upon him from Horus's engorged soul. Kneel, it demanded. Kneel before me. Abaddon would not kneel. I wanted to look on your face with my own eyes, Abaddon continued. You wait too long, father. Your army stand ready for your command. Everything is in place. All resistance has been purged from Terra's orbits. The bombardment proceeds as you ordered. Terra burns, my lord. But we wait here. We give our enemies time. We give them strength. Again, the word kneel screamed in Abaddon's head. His muscles strained, but he would not kneel. We are not yet gathered, said Horus. Such power was contained in his words it scalded Abaddon's soul. You push at the boundaries of your authority, my son. Once Horus valued nothing more than the counsel of his Mournival, and now it was sycophants and dark gods that held his ear. Abaddon looked into his father's eyes, and feared he witnessed the bonfire of Horus's soul consumed. It was too terrible a sight to endure, but he held his father's polluted gaze. Horus suddenly moved down from his throne dais, his vast bulk pushing past the lesser beings at his feet. Mortarion is late, growled Horus. Brothers, said Dawn, Captain General, Lord Malcador. The situation deteriorates, said Sanguinius. It does, said Dawn grimly. As he approached, a small-scale hololith of the solar system blinked on. The last pockets of resistance on Luna fell 2 days ago. All of our orbital forts and the sky fortresses adapted for the orbital plates are taken or destroyed. Horus has complete command of near-Terran void space. We are cut off, said Dawn. The war within the solar system had gone better and worse by predictions. Dawn could rely upon the arrogance of Perturabo, but now they fought Horus. We cannot rely on the same tricks twice. Neither can the enemy, said Jagatai Khan. Here we are up against the truth of will, continued Dawn. No more running, no more maneuvering. It is time for stone and steel to speak. You sound eager for the fight, said Sanguinius. Even the wind grows tired of running, said the Khan. Horus's armies are, said Dawn. He paused, as if he could not quite believe what he was about to say. A flicker of uncertainty passed behind his eyes. They are almost incalculable in size. There are representatives from every traitor legion within the solar system. He commands thousands of regiments of traitor soldiery, hundreds of knightly houses, dozens of Taito legios, which though they were diminished at Beta Garmin, he inclined his head to Sanguinius. Still outnumber our own. Now the inner system blockade has been swept aside. The united forces of the Dark Mechanicum are heading for Terra. We are beset on all sides. Throughout all this war, one thing has concerned me. Why this rush? Why does Horus speed to confront us? Were I to conduct this war, I would have delayed. Horus has left too many of our forces intact behind him. His initial strikes at Istvan and Kalth drew us into disarray, and weakened the Loyalist legions. But we retain billions of men under arms, from hundreds of thousands of untouched systems. He spent little time securing his conquests. I saw early a pattern emerging from his so-called dark compliances. The planets he invaded were chosen deliberately to supply his advance. This was no war of conquest. Everything he did was to facilitate this rush for Terra. While we reeled from his treachery, he could have redoubled his efforts to finish Guilliman off. Instead, he left Lorgar and Angron to fumble the attempt. Now he is here with Guilliman at his back, and yet even now he could win this war at a single command. Dawn paused. He does not. A new voice entered in. Horus wages a war that goes beyond the material realm, said Malkador. You cannot understand, because the matters of the spirit were not given to you to understand by your father. I could explain them at length, and you most of all would never comprehend. Do you not think if it were possible that I or your father could have explained them already, that you would have been told of the threat in the warp from the very beginning? I deeply regret that it was not done, said Dawn. The results would have been disastrous, believe me, said Malkador. Not telling us was arguably worse, said Dawn. Was it? Said Malkador softly. Chaos is all corrupting. It cannot be safely explained. Had they all been told, young and vulnerable as they were, perhaps more of them would have fallen. Only one was given the truth. Who, Malkador would not say. The 3 Primarchs protested. Do not think for one moment that your trial would have been any less arduous had you known in advance, said Malkador. I know you have been tested. Malkador looked to Sanguinius. There is space in the hells of the gods for more than one Red Angel. Sanguinius looked hurt. Malkador, said Dawn evenly. You overstep yourself. The Imperial Regent sank back into himself with an audible sigh. I am sorry. These are testing times. Even I have limits. You know that all of you are as good as sons to me. I merely seek to make a point. He looked to Sanguinius. Forgive me. I understand, Sanguinius said. Peace, uncle. This was a war for humanity's survival. A battle in the material and immaterium. It was the reason Terra still stood. For it was not enough to destroy humanity's birthplace. Horus had to kill the Emperor. Their father's survival was victory. And whilst the Emperor and Horus battled in the warp, the Angel, the Praetorian and the Warhawk would hold Terra. Guilliman's armada was coming, but they did not know when. For now, they were on their own. If Terra fell, they could escort the Emperor to the Phalanx, hidden in system by Admiral Sukasen. If it called for it, 3 Primarchs, 3 legions, and billions would die, so long as the dream lived. Horus brought most of his armies here. Rebute's forces are formidable, said Sanguinius. When I left him, more forces flocked to him on the way, including elements of Vulcan and Corax's legions we thought lost. When he arrives, It'll be at the head of a force the near match of Horus.
What of the others?
Is there any word from the wolf or the raven? Asked Jagatai.
Urus, the lion and Korax live.
Dawn's lip curled at the mention of Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves. They lived, but they would not affect the outcome of this battle. In fact, the Death Guard and Thousand Suns were still yet to be seen. Could Mortarion have had a change of heart? Wondered Sanguinius aloud. I am certain few of our brothers expected to find themselves allied with demons. Mortarion least of all. You know how much he hates the warp. Dawn's eyes narrowed. He thought momentarily of Alpharius. He had spoken with Dawn, and what he said could have been interpreted as contrition. Dawn had not listened, and had slain Alpharius at Pluto, a fact he still kept from his brothers.
None of them will change,
Dawn said. They are corrupt, traitorous, all of them. We cannot save them. They do not deserve saving.
I spoke with Mortarion in the ruins of Prospero,
said the Khan.
His hatred of the Emperor goes deep. He is fixated on our father's death. He will come.
Magnus was with the War Master. Though his soul was weakened, Malkador could sense him. So, 6 against 3, repeated Sanguinius, with 2 more coming. There are more of you than you think, said Malkador. A sly look crept across his face. Vulcan lives. The shock was visible on Sanguinius, Dawn and the Khan's face. Sanguinius protested. He had seen his brother's corpse upon Macragge. Each of the Primarchs had a unique gift, Malkador explained, and Vulcan was far more durable than imagined. Valdor confirmed that the Lord of Drake stood before the Golden Throne and the Webway Gate beneath the palace, ready to enact his unique role should the time come. The Khan began to laugh. Valdor continued, illuminating the missing pieces of the picture in the Primarch's mind. The Webway Project, the Emperor's dream to take humanity within its tunnels, to shield them from chaos forever. And Magnus's folly, the destruction of his defenses forever murdering that salvation. Over 90% of the custodian's corpses lay within that ancient realm, having fallen for nothing. Should the Emperor weaken, and the now corrupted gate break open to hell itself, Vulcan stood alone. What good can one Primarch do against all the evil of the warp? Asked Sanguinius. Malkador shrugged. What indeed? You have a point there. So I say that we had better win. The Khan leaned down to peer closely at Malkador.
You are old, but you are cunning. For all your signs of frailty, Sigillite, he said. Tell me now that you have something resembling a plan, that your agents in grey work for our victory, that your many wheels within wheels spin still to your design.
My knights errant are gone, said Malkador. Their purpose and mission are elsewhere. You are the plan, you 3. As of this moment, you know everything there is to know. Thank you, Malkador, for bringing our objectives into such sharp focus, said Dawn. He brought up a detailed map of the palace and its many defenses. It is time to discuss the practicalities of our survival. Always, his brothers sought to ground him, Sanguinius thought, as he flew above the Imperial Palace. Flight was the last pleasure left to him. He hoped Horus could see him beneath munitions bursting on the Aegis, and know he could not be touched. The palace stretched beneath Sanguinius, immense in scale, almost impossible to grasp as a whole. Dawn's defenses came close to matching the Emperor's vision in grandeur. The defense resources alone equaled in value the combined wealth of dozens of lesser empires. In places the walls were stepped with multiple battlements, marching up the outside. Hundreds and hundreds of towers punctuated its length, many topped with orbital batteries the size of hills. Cold winter winds blew from the heart of Eurasia that swept over Sanguinius's wings as he flew past the Lion's Gate spaceport. Sanguinius every time was overcome by the scale of his father's vision, and now that vision was ugly. Brutal by the fortification of war that covered every inch. Sanguinius' vision swam, until he looked down again. He saw a bloated mass. Cities built upon cities in a towering hellscape of oppression. What recognizable landmarks were swallowed by Gothic-like structures, blanketed in a haze of pollutants. This was a city in a time of only war. Sanguinius' mind returned to the present, and he let out a cry. He fell uncontrolled before mastering himself, and stretched out his wings again to catch the winds. More often his mind had drifted into visions, and all of them pointed to a future far darker than the past. Within minutes the second spaceport was behind him. Sanguinius wore his helmet, to mollify his brother rather than for safety, but it gave him access to the battleplate systems. Gauges on the faceplate display put his airspeed at well over 100 kilometers an hour. He smiled for the pleasure of it, and reluctantly began to check his speed. He went into a broad spiral, circling down towards the southern tower of a gate straddling the daylight wall, that section of the eternity wall that faced east, into the rising sun. "How was your flight?" said Ralderon, first captain of the Blood Angels Legion, and Sanguinius' equerry. "The winds of Himalasia always remind me of home," Sanguinius said. "Of the Wind River on Bar Secundus, where I first tested my wings. The speeds I could attain there." He let the sentence die. Sanguinius had rarely spoken of Bar since Cygnus Prime. Sensing unease in his lord, Ralderon introduced Captain Thane of the 22nd Company, Imperial Fists. "Your company is of the exemplar chapter of the 7th Legion?" said Sanguinius. "It is, my lord," replied Thane. "Do you live up to your name?" asked the angel. "We do, my lord," said Thane proudly. "There are no better builders in my legion than our chapter, and my company is among the best." Sanguinius looked out beyond the walls, to the miles of trenchwork and fortification spread before them. He saw the throng of conscripts, the mortal men and women who would occupy this buffer. It was a death sentence. Beyond the protection of the Aegis shield, that even now rippled with munitions, he only saw destruction and fire. The rest of Terra burned. On impulse, Sanguinius unclasped his golden helm and lifted it from his face. His shining hair unwound and flew like a banner. The cold wind should have been refreshing, but it carried the smell of burning and despair. "My lord," Ralderon gestured hesitantly to his Genefather's face. Sanguinius reached up and touched his cheek. As he brought his fingers away, he saw that they glistened with tears. He had not realized he was crying. "Why do you weep, my lord?" asked Ralderon. "I cry for the price of victory, my son," said Sanguinius. He spent the rest of the day inspecting the defenses of the Daylight Wall. So many who donned the Blood Angels' colours were new. Speed inducted by the Gene Vaults on Luna, Terrans who had never even seen Baal. So many faces he did not recognize. "Where are you?" said the Praetorian. "I am on the walls, at the fallen Dawn Tower, south of the Helios Gate," said Sanguinius. Dawn made a noise of annoyance. "What are you doing all the way out there?" "The Dawn's tower is the most easterly," Sanguinius said, ignoring his brother's irritation. "The name should have gone to the tower at the easterlymost point of daylight, surely." "What relevance does this have to anything?" Dawn said. "There is nothing to occupy myself with. I tell these warriors that I have come to oversee them, but there is little to oversee. Your Captain Thane has done an exemplary job." "Of the 22nd, Dawn said. "He is a good man. I teach my sons that nothing is worth doing if not done right. You should not put yourself at risk, brother." "Stay off the wall," said Dawn. "I am perfectly safe. We cannot hide in the Bab Bastion until Horus drags us out," Sanguinius replied. This was not the way Sanguinius, or especially the Khan, wished to fight. This was Dawn's war now. The waiting, the standing firm, the overall mind game of sieger and besieged. And Sanguinius chafed at it. "The Fabricator General wishes to speak with me," Dawn said. "I shall tell him you are coming. Perhaps then he will leave me alone. Zagreus Kane is loyal to the Imperium, committed to the alliance of Terra and Mars, and a valuable asset of our father. I am sure he is a genius in his own field of expertise, but he is no general. The communication cut off. "My brother," said Sanguinius to himself, is growing curt. Abaddon, Layak, Horus Aximand, Tormageddon and Falcus Kyber approached Horus. Like the War Master himself, the throne room looked the same and yet changed. On the surface, not much had altered. The banners had changed along with their allegiance, but the same decisions were made there. The same tables and chairs furnished the room. The real transformation was less obvious. It lingered out of sight, an unmistakable taint that hung over the hall. Horus rose from his throne, and Abaddon saw a glimpse of the man he knew. But his presence was such that the mourner struggled to remain standing, while Layak freely knelt. Horus had always possessed a preternatural charisma, but this was something else. A dark majesty that demanded all the universe grovel before it. "My brothers," Horus commanded, "hearken to me." One by one, cones of hololithic projection light leapt into being around the court, turning the shadows grey and filling the space with phantoms. Angron and Fulgrim transformed beyond the limitations of the human form. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron. Unlike his brothers, he retained his original form, too stubborn to give himself over to worship as they had. Following Perturabo, Magnus the Red appeared, manifesting as a psychic projection that lent him a form superior to the hololithic phantoms. When he walked, the air moved. Last was Kelbohal, fabricator of the Dark Mechanicum, and still missing Mortarion and his Death Guard. A last supper of arch-traitors submitted to their War Master, and began to discuss the assault on Terra.
You spoke of weaknesses,
said Fulgrim.
Then pray tell, O glowering, silky brother, where they are.
The shields cannot be brought down from outside,
said Perturabo, continuing his lecture as if Fulgrim had not spoken.
The palace possesses an unrivaled void network consisting of multiple layers of lenticular fields. These differ from a standard voidal energy bubble, which forms a single skin defense around its ward in spherical or hemispherical configuration. The technology required to project stable lensing is exceedingly difficult to replicate, and at this scale practically impossible. Yet following the old patterns, the Mechanicum succeeded. The palace Aegis networks consist of discrete elements, like a wall of shields, each an energy lens, each one overlapping the others enough that failure on the part of one reveals only a small hole, directly blocked below. By the time the lower lenses covering the hole are also brought down, the first will have been raised again. There are legions of Mechanicum adepts laboring beneath the palace to keep the shields in operation. Multiple redundancy networks protect against failures up to full systemic levels. Power is provided by advanced thermal conversion beneath the palace itself. It is a low-yield, but stable energy source, and cannot be upset by magnetic frequency harmonics as a plasma reactor might be. The power supply cannot be directly targeted. Only the destruction of the planet itself would be sufficient to interrupt the flow of energy from the palace vaults to the Aegis.
"Then let us sit down and lead our warriors in a glorious charge against the walls," growled Angron.
That would result in your total destruction, either on descent or on the ground. Be patient, brother. You will have your glory. The shields cannot be broken. They cannot be starved of power, but they can be weakened. This sequence depicts a rare failure. Within the bombardment pattern, I concealed several distinct targeting cycles to test various aspects of the Aegis. Modulation, raising speed, power absorption and displacement, displacement response time, displacement triggering velocity and others. Consolidation datasets fall into false, idealistic patterns. Direct practical experimentation is the only way I can be sure. The result of my tests can be witnessed here.
Several shells and a volley of lance fire sparked off the shields. Suddenly, a gap opened over a tower, exposing us to fire from orbit that quickly toppled it.
Alas, This small result was achieved only due to an isolated flaw in that part of the network. Augury readings suggest a chained failure in 3 series of void generatoria, quickly rectified.
Not so perfect, eh, Kelvorhal?
Giggled Fulgrim.
Note how quickly the shield is replaced.
Perturabo continued. The explosions changed back to toothless rounds of fire, flattened on the shields.
Then what are you proposing?
Growled Angron. His head shook, his face twitched, but he held his temper. His display of control was impressive.
From this response time, and the other measurements provided to me from the main fleet, I have determined that the voids can be weakened sufficiently to allow passage of medium to low velocity objects, around the fringe only.
Our brother has calculated a bombardment pattern of surpassing genius,
said Horus. For a moment, Perturabo's stolid expression showed a glint of pride.
We will unleash all of our fleet's firepower at these points.
The vid feed disappeared, replaced by a wider angle, a tri-view of the entire palace. Equally spaced red markers blinked on all 8 principal winds of the compass.
The precision of Perturabo's attack will cause a serial weakening of the shield wall.
Then it can be bombed,
said Fulgrim.
The bombardment will not penetrate the final layer. Rapid high-mass munitions or zero-to-mass light-speed energy emissions will still be displaced. However, the final Aegis layer will be weakened sufficiently to allow a 70% chance of successful passage to attack craft traveling at 150 kilometers an hour or lower.
We can attack directly. What fine news.
Fulgrim clapped with glee.
I shall prepare my squadrons at once.
Perturabo nodded.
Attack ships should prioritize void shield projection blisters and anti-ship weaponry towers, with secondary emphasis on anti-aircraft emplacements. Voids have one true vulnerability, that their projecting elements must be exposed. A large number are mounted on the wall itself. I predict an attrition rate of 45% attack ships lost, minimum. However, though the defenses are formidable, we shall darken the sky with such numbers, they will despair.
I will prepare my warriors,
bellowed Angron.
That brings us to the problem of the Neverborn.
Perturabo said. He paused.
Who will tell him?
You must find patience, my brother,
Magnus said to Angron.
The warp is in turmoil around Terra, but no demon may set foot there. Our father's power holds back the tides of the Empyrean. If you, I, or Fulgrim were to attempt a landing, our souls would be torn from our bodies and likely obliterated.
Perturabo's genius shows us the first cracks in Dawn's walls. We must force another. Every drop of blood spilled upon Terra's soil weakens our father's power. The second blow will quickly follow the first. Once our allies of the warp have access to the mortal sphere and the orbital defenses of Terra are crippled, then the legions shall attack.
There is a way to limit our father's power.
Magnus waved his hand, and a new image, far sharper than any hololith, appeared. Lines joined the 8 points together, into an octid, superimposed over the palace.
Center this upon the palace. Spill enough blood. Then and only then, Lord Angron, will Father's might be contained. And you may set foot safely upon Terra. Shortly after, all the legions of Neverborn, contained by eternity, shall march forth.
Sow the dragon's teeth, water the harvest with the blood of untold millions, and we shall come to you,
said Layak, quoting from the obscure scriptures.
It shall be as I decree,
commanded Horus. Katsuhiro felt his legs would give out. 12 hours of standing, within a transport so cramped that sitting was an impossibility. The stink of herd animals in fear was nauseating. The ramp lowered, and finally he stepped into the light. An artificial day as the fires of hell rippled against the palace shield. Katsuhiro looked out to the thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands. The throng of humanity shoving through a monorail terminus. Katsuhiro could not see far, but the pressure of many people pushed at him from all directions. Voices shouted, wailed, screamed, and begged in cacophonous profusion. Scribes, old warriors, algae farmers, technicians, rich, poor, young, old. Every hue of skin and eye and hair present upon Terra was there. Every uniform and badge of occupation Katsuhiro had ever seen, all conscripted for the defense of the palace. Katsuhiro shook. Shock, lack of food, cold, and the effort of standing upright for so many hours were each enough alone to upset his humours. Together they brought him close to collapse. A warm hand slipped around his side and pulled him close. Ordinarily, Katsuhiro would have recoiled from such unexpected intimacy, but now he welcomed it. A small, powerfully built man had him, shorter by a few centimeters than Katsuhiro. He had to look up to address him. He was filthy and stank of oil and stale clothes, but his smile was genuine. "Cold, isn't it?" he said. "Enough to knock you down if you aren't used to it. Winter at the top of the world. The name's Doromek, from Baltisia." Katsuhiro swallowed his distaste and simply looked shook at Doromek's hand. "Katsuhiro," he said. "Dragon Nations, eh?" said Doromek. "We've got a fine mix here and no mistake. Tell you what, let's get you sorted out. You want to get that bag strap off your neck." As Katsuhiro struck with the bag over his head, it had somehow gained weight since it had been hung there. The man continued talking. "You'll find tablets in there. Recap tabs. Salt and gluconium energy blends. Take one of each, chew them up. Just don't swallow them. It'll get the spit flowing in your mouth and make it easier for your body to process them. You hear me?" "Is there water?" Katsuhiro asked. "Not yet," said the dirty little man. A hard-faced woman barged her way into their conversation. "You two, shut up," said the woman. "They don't like it if you talk. I don't want the attention." "But someone has got to tell us what is going on," Katsuhiro protested. Another responded to this, a man even thinner than anyone else, who was cleaning his nails with a worn knife. "They don't have to tell you anything, my friend. Nobody does. You're soldiers," said the woman hastily. "There are things expected of you. Shutting up is one of them." "I am not a soldier," said Katsuhiro. "I am a third-grade enumerator for the 86th Nihon Nutrient Complex," said Katsuhiro. The woman shot him a grim smile. "You were. You're a soldier now," she said. Katsuhiro joined the rest of the motley group in similar uniforms as they were stuffed onto anti-gravitic trains. Katsuhiro was lucky enough to be pressed against a windowed compartment. He saw the great mountain of a spaceport, and a view of a city he had never seen for himself, but every man, woman and child on Terra knew. The artful spires and bridges he expected from the holocausts had gone, replaced by buildings more fit for war. Not all had changed. He glimpsed the soaring tower of Hegemon and the great dome of the Senatorum Imperialis, where giant machines stood guard. Fire, titans, glory and doom, all gone in a heartbeat, as the train plunged into a growing darkness. Katsuhiro passed a couple of nights in freezing warehouses, an interminable wait that ended without any warning, with an early waking, and they were packed onto another less luxurious train. All over the palace weapons fired skyward. Plasma, shells, lasers and rockets roared towards the War Master's fleet. The counter-barrage was so loud that no voice could be heard, and their guiding officials were forced to resort to hand signals. Bitter winds and heavy snow smacked Katsuhiro in the face, as he and his assigned regiment poured out and began the arduous walk towards the outer walls. Walls was almost too small a word for it. They were mountains of guns, and rockcrete that no doubt housed millions. He and others stared at the space marines in crimson and amber plate. He had never seen the giants before, and to his dismay, realized they weren't joining them. Katsuhiro's ears were ringing as they passed across 3 entrenched lines. His conscript regiment stood sloppily before an exhausted-looking commander. Katsuhiro could barely hear his voice over the pounding of the guns. He gave the impression of being a man who had seen everything, and liked very little of it. "Is this it?" said the man miserably. "No officers. It's just me. Ghosts of old Earth. We're all gonna die." "Right, you lot," yelled their new officer over the thunder of the bombs and the moan of the wind. "My name is Janan. I'm an acting captain, lucky me. That makes me your commander. Do what I say or you'll get shot." He made an expression that could equally have been a scowl or a smile. "That is, I'm sorry to inform you, the full extent of my military training that is currently available under the circumstances. You're all now members of the Kushtan Naganda, one of the old 100 from Ind. Not that you're worthy of the honour, not that it matters anymore, anyway." The march to the first line began. Katsuhiro's dismay continued to rise, whilst never hitting the peak he expected. There seemed to be no end to how much fear he could feel. It surprised him he was still able to walk, or talk, or do anything, but he did. His terrified mind operating his limbs through a buzzing fog of terror. He felt numb inside and out, cold, like the ankle-deep snow slushing beneath his tread. "This ain't so good, is it?" said the thin man conversationally. "I just love being cannon fodder. Isn't that right, darling?" He shouted up at the woman from the station, who was a few ranks ahead. She scowled at him. "I wouldn't call her darling if I were you," said Doromek. "I know her kind, my friend. She'll kill you." The thin man snorted. "I mean it," said Doromek. It was then that Katsuhiro realized they weren't just heading out to the front line. They were the front line. All manner of traitorous forces. Even the Space Marines would smash them first. It was then that he fully accepted that he was going to die. "You, talkative man." Janan strode out of the rain. "Yes, sir." Doromek gave a sly smile. The thin man, Runikan, apparently grinned. "I urge you, giving all these wretches the benefit of your wisdom. Are you a military man?" snapped Janan. "Don't lie to me. I can check. Save us the time and tell me now." "I was once," admitted Doromek. "Roll," Janan grunted. "Sniper. Then how come you weren't called up in the early drafts?" Janan's eyes narrowed. Doromek shrugged. "Lucky, I guess." "Hiding, you mean? Well, your luck's run out. You're my new lieutenant. Congratulations." Doromek grinned at Katsuhiro as Janan stalked off in the mud. "That makes you my first sergeant," Doromek said with a tone of delight that Katsuhiro didn't feel. The regiment looked out across the trench. The storm was coming. Mercifully spared duty, Katsuhiro had fallen into a deep, sudden sleep atop a pile of sacks, just as soon as he'd found somewhere to hide. It was a sleep with the restless that almost felt pointless, though later Katsuhiro would look upon it fondly, as a sudden boom roared and rippled through his body. "The void's over the palace," someone yelled. Katsuhiro scrambled up from the mud and snow. He looked up. The edges of the other void shields were visible, thanks to the lack of the missing element, layered over one another in flat petals that pulsed like hearts with every impact. They held back their portion of the bombardment, but through the holes, shells fell, unimpeded, making it down to the ground and exploding. A shock wave sent Katsuhiro flying. He smashed into the ground and felt his mind swim. He rose slowly, lasgun in his hands. Explosions, flying mud and shockwaves overwhelmed everything. Doromek found him again. "The first gun falls. This is it now," he said. "They'll concentrate their fire like that to take out the biggest anti-ship cannons we have. Little by little, they'll nibble it away until there is nothing left to threaten their landing zones." "Landing zones?" repeated Katsuhiro dumbly. "We're lucky," Doromek said sardonically. "I'd say they're clearing this area here. They're going to be coming right at us." Katsuhiro saw the traitor ships pierce the skies of Terra, transports hauling the lost and the damned. The guns of Terra barked into the mass, but it would not be enough. "For too long you have suffered," the Apostle's voice rang over the Vox speakers, frightening with the rising bleats of the herd. Asmodai strained to listen. Comprehension was slipping away into animality. He considered the part that listened his human half. The other part, the beast part, jerked against the leashes of shame. Soon it would break free. But for now he could still understand. You have been cast out and consigned to the fringes of 10,000 worlds, fit only for the noisome places where purebloods will not go, the Apostle said. You are the lords of ruin, for ruins are all you have ever had to call your own, the citizens of the Imperium, whose upright tyrants who shun you have another name for you, a shameful name, a name that is sowed through with their contempt. Beastmen. The hold erupted with shouts and cries. There were those who raged, but most voices cried out in despair. They call you beastmen. In the beginning, when man left the world you will soon conquer, he had but one form. Many places molded their genome of our species, and one form became many. Asmodee's breaking mind reeled with the sermon. Others retained the name of human, but not you. Not you. Your dignity was taken from you. You were decreed as less than human, abhuman, mutant, undesirable on worlds you called home for hundreds of generations. The Emperor meddles with mankind's form, and they call his monsters heroes. Yet you, the rightful children of change, are branded beasts. If a man is treated as a beast, then he becomes a beast, the Apostle screamed. The beastmen roared out their pain. They locked their horns and butted heads. The hold reeked of droppings and rage. Beasts! Shouted a beastman close to Asmodee. Beasts! Bleated another. The cry spread through the herd, until the hold shook with stamping hooves and the chant of beasts, beasts, beasts. The Apostle continued. But to the Pantheon you are holy beings. You are pure. You are the children of chaos. You are the living example of mutability. Go out into the fire, and cast down those enthralled to the false emperor. Trample his works beneath your feet. Wet your horns with the blood of unbelievers. His muzzle was shaking. Asmodee opened his mouth and threw back his horned head. Beasts! He roared. His human mind sank into rage. Asmodee understood nothing. His thoughts were of a single sheet of red. He leapt from the metallic tomb and landed on the soil of Terra. The pounding of guns could not frighten him, only quickened the racing of his heart. His feet were arranged like beasts, with powerful haunches and elongated feet, with the ankle held high off the floor, so that he ran on the single toe of his hoof. Such physiology gave the beastkin great speed, and they outpaced the pure men and mutants pouring from their own landing craft. Asmodee ran with the wind, his mane flowing behind him, his swollen tongue lolling from foam-flecked jaws. A bright red light pierced through his shoulder, but he did not care, even as he smelt the burned flesh and hair. In his hand, Asmodee clutched a simple maul, a threaded barb with a nut the size of a man's fist, screwed onto the end. Shouting wildly, his cries more bleats than words, he leapt, landing upon a man with a face of pure terror. He smashed his weapon straight through the man's skull in a sickening crunch. He bleated in exultation and dipped his head and impaled another on his horns. The rest of his kin joined him and flooded the mud-slick trench lines, filling it with blood and screams. 3 lines! Make 3 lines! Janin had found a handful of veterans like himself, and they kicked, swore and shoved the conscripts into 3 wavering ranks, stretching between the 3rd and 2nd rampart lines. Katsuhiro couldn't keep his eyes forward. Such was the horror. A pitiful few men and women from the first line, covered in grime and blood, ran screaming towards them, a look of absolute horror upon their faces, reflected within Katsuhiro. Few were grabbed by veterans, as others scrambled desperately past towards the walls. Las shots cut them down. Any one of you cowards run like him. You'll die the same. Now, 3 lines. Another company was running up, this one a little better disciplined than Katsuhiro's own, with a 3rd on their heels, enough to fill the space between the 2 outermost defense works completely. All of their officers were shouting, whistles blowing. "This is a fine mess," whispered Doromek from behind. The hard woman, Ms. her name, was close by him. She gave them both a black look. Katsuhiro had not yet seen another kind on her face. Faces pale with fear looked out at the enemy. Black figures emerged as individuals from the group, but the flickering battle light made it hard to pick out details. Janin pushed his way in front of his company and turned to face them. "Look," he said, pointing behind the running mass of enemy. "They are coming for us because people like you lost their nerve and abandoned their positions. Our lords and masters, up there on the walls, are turning their guns upon the overrun sections. If you do not hold, if you do not stand and fire in a straight, Emperor-beloved line, then you will die. Because if those monsters don't kill you, your own side will. And I, for one, do not wish to die today. You will fire until your power packs are empty, but most of all you will hold your ground." All up the line of soldiers, similar speeches were being delivered to the other terrified conscripts. Shakily, Katsuhiro and the conscripts raised their guns. Doromek was already firing, as the silhouettes grew from the smoke. Then a wall of red light lasfire smashed into the wall of hate, but it was not enough. Katsuhiro blinked. Something was fast approaching. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. No man could jump so high. Katsuhiro found himself face to face with one of the creatures. His mouth sported sharp tusks, along flat, grazer's teeth, all slit with bloody foam that dribbled down its face and off its wispy beard. Its eyes were wide, wild, but human-looking. It snorted at him, and it swung a threaded bar with a nut the size of a man's fist, screwed onto the end. There was a split second in which Katsuhiro could react. One side of it was death, on the other, life. Deep inside Katsuhiro, something gave way like a dam. A flood of rage swept aside his passive, former self. He screamed as he lunged forward, ramming his bayonet into the creature's gut. An agonized bleat rang out as Katsuhiro twisted the point in its guts. The creature died, and more fell around him, their heads bursting from last shots as fellow conscript bodies and limbs flew in the air. The frenzy seemed to die down, as the last of these goat men creatures were cut down. So much death, bodies everywhere, but many of the conscripts still stood. A wave of mist began to creep towards the reforming line. Lasgun snapped up more crisply now, the weak of their number dead or wailing in pain. A heart-stopping wail cut through the brume. Giant shapes lurched through the smoke, bursting through it, and suddenly there were other things pressing the line of men. Huge mounds of quaking flesh that shuddered forward on twisted legs. They were as slow as the abhumans were fast, but seemingly impervious to lasfire. Chains hung from them, gripped by handlers who looked insane. They were barely human. Heads lolled on boneless necks. Human eyes peeped from fanged orifices. Human tongues screamed lunacy from multiple mouths. And they crashed into the mass of humanity, sending mud and bodies flailing as they tore men and women apart like vicious animals. Katsuhiro met eyes with one of the mutant creatures. As if recognizing prey, it bounded towards him. He dived to the side as a barbed tentacle of flesh missed him by a breath. She moved so fast. Katsuhiro didn't recognize her. Only when she slowed to step on the mutant's swollen foot and launch herself up did he see who it was. The hard woman, Ms., tossed something into the beast's mouth. A grenade. Katsuhiro realized a moment later. The grenade exploded inside the mutant, rupturing its flesh and sending it into keening throes. It was mortally wounded, but still lived, flopping around in pain, thrashing its limbs with deadly ferocity. A dead handler whipped around on the end of its reins. Katsuhiro shouted, and discharged his gun into the thing's single eye. It exploded with the first hit, but he did not stop firing until the mutant was lying on the ground, body heaving at last. He stared at it. He had never seen anything like it. He had no idea things like that even existed. A hand caught his upper arm gently. "Nice job," said Doromek. "It's time to get you out of here." They ran back towards the third line, tanks around them grinding forward, still discharging their guns in the cleanup of the first wave. Katsuhiro lived. His fear had been murdered by the need to survive. The first attack had been repelled. the first of many more to come.
Dawn defies us. The walls should be broken. The streets red with blood. Attack! Attack! We must attack!
Angron's growls rang across Lupercal's court. Drool ran from his snarl, vanishing into nothing as it fell outside the imaging field.
Walls cannot be shut down,
Perturabo said, his voice the ringing of a leaden bell.
You have lost your patience with your sanity.
He is not insane, said Fulgrim sweetly. Are you, dear brother?
Do not allow this snake to address me,
roared Angron.
Cease your yapping, hound,
said Perturabo.
This is a gathering of intellect, not animals. Speak with me in person, and we shall see who is silenced first,
roared Angron.
I bested you before, and will do so again,
said Perturabo levelly. Abaddon glanced at his Genesire's empty throne. Horus was late to the meeting. Abaddon stepped forward, but did not speak. He stood in the midst of the Primarchs, and disdainfully watched their bickering.
I have heard enough,
cut Lord Angron's audio feed. Abaddon said. The Red Angel was left a silent, raging ghost.
Look at how weak you have become,
said Abaddon in disgust.
Lord Perturabo,
you sit at the edge of the system pronouncing your genius, and implying no one heeds you. This behavior is not worthy of you.
Do not provoke me, First Captain,
said Perturabo levelly.
Be quiet a minute, or you will find yourself further goaded,
Abaddon snarled.
You, Fulgrim,
and you, Angron, have sold yourselves out to the gods of the warp. Angron raged in silence. Fulgrim tittered girlishly. Abaddon glared at him. Fulgrim pulled a lewd face.
Where is your majesty?
Where is your purpose? We stand at the threshold of victory, and you threaten everything with your bickering, said Abaddon. The door to the court opened, and Horus strode in. More alive and vibrant than he had seemed the last time, Abaddon thought.
Captain Abaddon is correct,
said Horus. You disgrace yourselves. I commune with the powers who guide my hand, and strive to ensure our victory in their realm as in this. They say this, that Abaddon is right. You gather power to yourselves and become pathetic for his successes. Cease your arguments, or face the punishment of your patrons. Fulgrim and Angron seemed especially kowtowed. Horus swept his gaze around his sibling images. The time has come to enact the second phase of the invasion. Ambassadress Sotanul, attend us, he said. 9 of the Dark Mechanicum stepped forward, conjoining into a dark choir of tech and mankind. The Fabricator General Kelborhal was seemingly out of favor. The Aegis is sufficiently weakened to permit a larger assault to begin, said Horus. Our attack craft destroy more of their defensive batteries with each sortie. The numbers of their own defense squadrons dwindle within the hour. The efficiency of the palace outworks is broken. All over Terra, our loyal armies conquer and burn. Now we must take the fight to the walls, and open the way for our allies from the Imperium. The Mechanicum will land their arc ships upon the surface at 8 points of the Octid. We shall begin the work of besieging the palace in earnest. Siege camps shall be established. That is my purpose, Perturabo interrupted in outrage. You said that I would be given the honor of breaking Dawn's fortress. You do not listen to me, brother. You dismiss my ideas. You do not let me attack the Son of Soul itself, to bring this to a speedy conclusion, or to break Terra into rubble. Horus placated his brother, but the sour look never left the Lord of Iron's face.
What of my never-born legions?
Angron growled.
What is this witch's hex that keeps me from the battle?
Zardu Layak stepped forward. The Primarchs fell to grudging quiet. The Emperor shields Terra, said Layak, but he cannot do so forever. Blood flows in such torrents upon the throne world that it calls across the barrier between the warp and the material realm. Each death sees the servants of the Pantheon push harder on the veil, when the weight of slaughter is great enough. Then they will be called through in their multitudes. Perturabo was first to grasp the strategy, and nodded in understanding. If Father's dogs attack the siege camps, they will spill more blood, and aid the coming of your allies. If they do not, then the Mechanicum may raise engines by the dozen to break the walls. Dawn will see this, but he will have no choice. A rare smile broke across Perturabo's features. "Then I shall land first," said Angron enthusiastically. "I shall come with them and cleave their bodies. You will not," said another, a familiar, quiet, rasping, sullen growl. A voice changed and thickened with phlegm. "I claim the task. My legion will be first to attack the walls, as I pledged to the War Master months ago." Mortarion, Primarch of the Death Guard, entered through the grand doors of Lupercal's court. This was not the Mortarion as his brothers remembered him. He was changed. Mortarion appeared enormous, sickly, his face scarred by disease, and his eyes milky with cataracts. Fluid wept from the craters in his dirty armor, while all around him swirled a dense, stinking fog. His lungs rattled as he knelt before the War Master. All legionaries fell over coughing and choking, all except Abaddon, to his surprise. "My War Master, I heed your call," wheezed Mortarion, chosen of Nurgle. Abaddon suppressed a sneer. Such weakness. The Lord of Death had traded his position as a Lord of Men to become a slave to the gods. Angron paced in and out of the field of view of his hollow emitter. Fulgrim giggled. Perturabo glared. "My brother, we welcome you," said Horus. "Rise. My sons will go before me to prepare the way." "They are ready," said Mortarion. "We bring new weapons for an old war. My warriors have transformed the limitations of mortality. Nothing can harm them, while I have 7 plagues for you to unleash upon Terra. Let the unseen soldiers of Bacillus and Virus reap the foe, and add their deaths to the toll. And when the tally pleases Father Nurgle, then I shall descend to the palace and take my vengeance upon the false emperor." Thousands of fires burned on a cratered plain fronting the eastern walls. Defensive lines wriggled their way across the terrain, like the marbling of fat and meat. Flights of attack ships from both sides swarmed thickly over the battlefield. The plain surrounding the palace was shattered. The corpses of fallen vessels were scattered everywhere, and the tides of armies moving over the land stained it black. Clane Penn's Arch Mechanicum took its first orbital breach with good graces, though it jutted and burned, as the thick layers smashed against the outer shielding of the Aegis. 8 arcs of the Dark Mechanicum thundered around the palace, in a configuration of the profane 8-pointed star. The sides of the pentarch opened like petals. Ramps slid out from housing. Armored doors opened. A stream of cyborgs and semi-autonomous mechanisms, forbidden machine intelligences, and things motivated by the essence of darker sorts. They began working as soon as they walked off the ships, ignoring the weapons fire that punctuated the void shields of their transports. They worked neat and as orderly as ants, though each device had a governing mind of its own, be it human, machine, or otherwise. All were enslaved to the will of the machine god, all enacted by the 8. Under the disciples' direction, they began the next phase of the War Master's plan. Within 2 hours, the frameworks of the siege camps was in place, and growing outwards. It was always with him, the vision, once the most beloved brother Horus, taking his life. The nightmare always haunted Sanguinius, but its appearance had become more frequent. Dawn was right. All of them were symbols, and though he hated the role his father had placed upon him, and which Gilliman had exploited, he took it upon himself the burden of humanity's hopes again. Surrounded by his sanguinary guard and legionary banners, The angel walked along the outer walls. Wherever Sanguinius went, memories of sunless dawns were kindled. The people remembered better times, and hoped those times might yet return. The enforcers of each city block he passed reported a calming of mood, and a cessation of violence that lasted several days. His procession took him many days, passing several areas facing various siege camps of the Dark Mechanicum. But in time he found himself staring down the daylight wall. The repairs by Thane and his exemplars rough, but holding. Sanguinius strode up to his first captain, Ralderon. "We have been lucky thus far," said Sanguinius. "The walls are holding past Dawn's more optimistic estimates." He ran his gaze over the displays, away from the live feeds covering the siege camp. "The outer works, less so," he said, gesturing to the images of scarred, twisted lands where trenches, walls and men had been only a fortnight before. "The enemy continues to test our defences, and taunt us with their intent," said Sanguinius. "This is a ritual. The palace is the epicenter. I imagine whatever they plan will be fueled by blood." All the blood angels present had been at Cygnus, and at Davin. They had witnessed the true horror of the warp, and its scars remained. "The conscripts fight bravely," said Ralderon. "They hang on, and repulse the enemy every time, though they dwindle in number daily, and I am forced to order the war guns activated more frequently to bombard compromised sections. I regret we cannot go to aid them ourselves." "Lord Dawn forbade me from fighting outside the walls," said Sanguinius. He turned his sad, noble eyes to his equerry, but he did not forbid us to venture outside. Sanguinius paused. "Let us go down, outside the wall. I want to go amongst them. I want to see the troops. I want to tell them their heroism is valued." Sanguinius saw the worry in his sons' faces. All the blood angels had a foreboding that their lord might leave them soon. They felt it in their hearts and in their humours, but Sanguinius knew he would not die today. A lucky few were given coats to stave off the cold. Katsuhiro was not amongst them. To begin with, he cut a hole in the middle of his blanket and wore it over his head as a poncho. He was never warm, even when the dead provided him with a padded jacket and trousers more suited to the climate. All were bloodied and covered in excrement and rotting flesh. He had ceased to care. The cold was a worse killer than the guns. Battle was an infrequent peril. The cold was persistent. Sometimes it rained a toxic slime of pollutants from the burning cities. When it stopped, it left behind a metallic stink. Those who dared to drink the rain perished. Some tried for lack of water. Thirst and hunger tormented them all. But after a time, some drank the water purposely in order to escape. But for a moment, it all faded away. Katsuhiro had forgotten what purity looked like. But in Sanguinius he was reminded. Men and women fell to their knees as Sanguinius passed along the line. Fear ebbed. Filthy hands reached out to touch the Lord of Angels. His warriors moved to push the soldiers back, but Sanguinius raised his hand and the guards moved away. A female soldier was the first to dare to hold out her fingers to his wings. The feathers twitched, but Sanguinius stood firm and allowed her to caress him. Another person came forwards, then another, until a crowd was around the great angel, arms radiating inwards like worshippers from less enlightened times. Sanguinius was uncomfortable. Katsuhiro could see it, though he masked it well. Like all the rest, Katsuhiro was captivated and moved towards him, his feet dragging through the mud of their own volition. The angel's radiance touched Katsuhiro. He felt a peace in his heart, a calmness in his mind and a stilling of fears. The aches and chills that sickened him were alleviated briefly. For a moment, he felt whole again, and yet a hollowness filled him as the Primarch moved further on. It compounded within him how insignificant he was. This was a war of demigods. Katsuhiro, Doromek, Runakan, and the stern woman Miz departed from the front line, set to explore a worrying concern of tunnels, unearthed by the bombardments. Katsuhiro was held back by Runakan. "They know each other," The hive rat had whispered to him, but Katsuhiro didn't want to hear it. Yes, Ms. and Doromek were by far the most competent in their unit, but he had no desire to hear the paranoia. There are traitors everywhere, my friend, Ranakan said. Traitors. Spies. The thought made Katsuhiro shiver. Sanguinius was still outside the wall when the bombardment ceased. They knew what this meant. My lord, Ascalon began. He waved forwards the sanguinary guard to shield the Primarch. We remain. My brother will need me, Sanguinius said, his voice still distant. Ascalon looked to Rauderon. What do you foresee, father? Rauderon asked quietly. A need for assistance. The White Scars come, said Sanguinius. A low buzzing grew. Jagorian war chants became louder, until they were a wall of sound. Sanguinius smiled as his brother roared by on an oversized jet cycle and tilted his stubby wings to salute. Mortals ducked, so close to the ground were the White Scars flying. Jagatai was ordered by Dawn not to attack, but he is the Khan of the Ordu of the White Scars Legion, the Warhawk of Chagoris, and one might as well attempt to chain the wind. The miles of distance was covered in mere moments, as the 5th Legion roared towards the Mechanicum camp. Sanguinius looked skywards calmly. The Death Guard were coming. I do not die today. Sanguinius roared to his sons, and if I do not aid my brother on his return, he will. I have seen it. My sword, my spear, man the ramparts alongside these brave warriors of the Imperium. His helm was brought and Sanguinius locked it in place. It is time at last for the 9th Legion to fight. Jagatai Khan's jetbike surged as a stream of White Scars began to wrap around the traitor camp. Many fell as a wall of munitions cut down Jagatai's sons, but it would not stop them. Jagatai and his sons banked, roaring into the camp's rear and reaping through the horde of warrior servitors and mechanical guns. For the Emperor, he roared. For unity, for the Imperium. When the Tulwar struck the enemy, they exploded in showers of oily blood. Onwards, onwards, my Ordu. Death, death to the traitors, Jagatai called. His war cries broadcast over his legion's voxnet, and the Khan's answers were loud with laughter and jubilation. Too long that they skulked behind the walls. The wind had them, filling them with its rushing power and lifting them up with its strength. They tore through the Mechanicum lines and made towards the camp shield generators. The generators exploded in a shower of sparks as they thundered munitions into it. Sons of Chagoris, Jagatai voxed. Break free. Return to the walls. As suddenly as they attacked, the White Scars disengaged. Always the first in, the first to leave. The guns of the walls were now free to target and rip. The White Scars passed through a hail of ordnance heading out. Explosions boomed behind them, cutting off the fire that chased them. Jagatai revved his bike to full speed, towards the Blood Angels and mortal men, standing together on the trench line. He looked up, and thousands of sickly lights grew through the smoke. The Death Guard were coming. Katsuhiro rested his gun on the rampart's lip. The men were sheltered by fortification, in most cases only their heads exposed. The Blood Angels assembled side by side with Katsuhiro. Bolters raised as pods fell from the sky. Green sickly mist began to bulge forward towards them, and Katsuhiro glimpsed monstrous silhouettes within. Ranakan was screaming something, more about Doromek, but Katsuhiro couldn't hear. Katsuhiro saw Sanguinius atop the wall, weathering the munitions as if they were nothing. His face still looked distant. Then he raised his spear and dropped. The angel spread his wings and dived towards the enemy, his lesser angels in his wake. Jagatai Khan's jetbike plunged down. Its golden prow ploughed poison mist, then earth. The Khan leapt free at the point of impact. He rolled twice, using the momentum of the fall to launch himself back to his feet, where he skidded to a halt, Talwar poised to strike. He stood ready, every sense alert in the muffled battle zone. His warriors sped overhead. Interference crackled in his helm, his communications useless in the electromagnetic bombardment. Then they came for him. Attack is the best defense. So Jagatai Khan plunged toward the shape in the mists. Through his armor filters, Jagatai smelled the corruption upon Mortarian's sons. There was a sickness of flesh and soul. They fought slowly, but the doggedness that they were known for had been intense by the fall into darkness. And no matter how many he killed, they pressed at him without cease. His fury would have inspired 1,000 bards, had any been able to see it. The fogs made his fight a lonely struggle. Hidden from all knowledge, he faced the Death Guard alone. He was a god amongst men, but even sons of the Emperor tire. The first cut to break through his armor came after his 40th kill. A son of Mortarian lunged at the back of his knee, while he was engaging 4 in the front. The weapon he sought to slay a Primarch with was a simple combat knife, but perseverance pushed it through the armored ribbing of the joint seal. The Khan struck his assailant down, but he felt for the first time in his life a fever grow in his blood. His moves became sluggish as more Death Guard poured onto him, the prospect of killing a Primarch too tempting. Jagatai lashed under a mountain of bodies, unable to spare a moment to release the corrupted knife. He looked around at his brother's corrupted sons and wondered what awful pact had been agreed to make them so, and give them power to sicken a Primarch. "Mortarian, what have you done?" he shouted. "I am Jagatai Khan," he roared, his final battle cry as death approached. "I am Jagatai Khan, loyal son of the Emperor, and I have ridden well." More disease gauntlets swarmed him, trying to stab more seals and kill the Warhawk of Jagoris. Jet bikes cut through the gas. The air was filled with the sound of engines and Jagorian voices. "The Khan! The Khan! To the Khan!" they cried. A warrior of the Ordu leapt from his steed, the speed of his fall turning him into a living ordnance that ploughed through the grimy ranks of Mortarian's brood. He was hacked apart as soon as he rose, but he had done his work. His Gene Father was free. The Khan erupted from the pile of Death Guard, his talwar flaring again with the lightning of its energy field. This time he firmly grasped the night hilt sticking from his leg, and this time he wrenched it free. My Ordu, to me! Jagoris calls, ride to me!" he screamed, as sons answered their father's call. Sanguinius' voice sliced through the muffling fog, as if it were not there. "My brother! To the aid of my brother!" Katsuro snapped off shot after shot, leaving the traitor Marines to the attentions of the Blood Angels, as he downed mutants, sickly men and turncoat army soldiers. When the call went out, the Blood Angels looked out into the gas, following something that he could not see. They stood from the wall as one and leapt over the sloping rampart. "Drive them back!" roared their sergeants. "Into them! For the Emperor! For Sanguinius!" Caught up in their bloodlust, the conscripts rose alongside the Blood Angels and charged after them. Katsuro ran behind a Blood Angel, snapping off opportunistic shots and jabbing with his bayonet. Katsuro saw a line of Death Guard forming up ahead. Raised above them on a pile of corpses was a giant in white. Another Primarch. The Warhawk himself. Caged lightning that was too terrible to behold. He was joined by an angel that dived into the masses of bloated Marines. Arcs of tainted blood staining the Terran soil. The Blood Angels roared the name of their Primarch, Sanguinius, as they trampled over the Death Guard and mortal traitors. "We must depart now," Sanguinius told his brother. "They will return." Already the shelling was picking up pace around them. "Not quite yet, my brother," said the Khan, pushing past his guardians. "What are you doing?" yelled Sanguinius, but followed after the limping Khan. "My jet bike. I must go to it and upload the images I gathered there. The haywire wiped my armor data cache. With this, we shall know our enemy better, and beat him all the more soundly." "This is unwise, brother," Sanguinius shouted, losing off a blast from the spear of Telesto. "Nothing in war is wise. Violence is not wisdom. Do you believe I went over the wall merely for glory?" said the Khan. "It had crossed my mind you might be bored," said Sanguinius. "Hold them back." The Khan's laughter turned into coughing. Snapping the data from the jet bike, a Thunderhawk roared in, Sanguinius dragged his limping brother up the rampart. As the White Scars, Blood Angels and conscripts retreated back towards the third trench line. The Khan and the Angel looked at each other as the tainted knife in the Khan's hands evaporated as soon as they reached within the palace walls. The warp. Its malign influence was kept at bay by their father. They both knew it. Katsuhiro removed his gas mask upon Doramek's insistence. "Thank the Emperor," said Katsuhiro. "The Emperor protects." Doramek gave him a curious look. "You're not one of them, are you? The worshippers?" "I..." said Katsuhiro. "What? I just heard it somewhere." "Well," said Doramek, "the Emperor has nothing to do with this. Space Marines and blind chance save the day." They approached their line and found the body of Runican. "Leave me alone," Katsuhiro whispered. "Suit yourself," said Doramek. Katsuhiro watched until Doramek had gone. Then he examined the body. His heart raced as he saw Runican had been shot in the back. Khan ran in his Genefather's footsteps. Where the demon Primarch trod, the metal smoked. Heat as much as anger radiated from Angron. Mortals ran from him. Those that did not fell convulsing, bleeding from their eyes, or else attacked one another in awful outbursts of violence. The Red Angel had not stopped raging across his own ship since the shunning by Horus, an acquiescence to the Death Guard. "Khan, I have reports of a demi-company attempting to breach Hangar 19. Not far from your position," Lotara's voice said in his helmet. Khan swallowed spittle. "We are nearly there, Lotara," he said. "Angron knows." Speaking with the ship's mistress calmed his fury a little, but not much. He struggled to concentrate. "That is not good," she said. "I would agree," Khan finally managed. "You will not land before me," Angron roared and sprinted ahead. "I will be first. I must go," Khan swore, and ran after him. Angron would not rest until everyone in the corridor was dead. A company of World Eaters had tried to leave, to race on ahead before the demon Primarch. Angron wouldn't let them. He butchered his sons as in their own rage they attacked their Primarch. Khan tried to think of a way to calm his lord, to bring his rage to manageable levels, but the answer eluded him. The scent of blood, the biting of the nails in his head was overwhelming. "Seal decks 84 through 90, port side and the spinal way, every entrance." He could barely speak. His vision swam. "Confirmed. No one runs from the Conqueror," Latara said. "What about you?" "Khan." Words belonging to something else forced themselves out of his mouth. "Blood for the Blood God," he roared, and joined the battle at his father's side. Khan's presence terrified the bridge. Latara's armsmen stiffened when he entered, holding their weapons down but ready. The sound of his tread clanging slowly off the deck made the deck officers cower. They could smell the blood caked onto his weapons. They shivered at the clinks of the chains that bound them to his armor. Let them tremble, he thought. Let them fear me. Latara Sin feared him too, but she was brave enough to face him. She had been waiting impatiently for him, and got up to speak to Khan as soon as he approached the command throne. "We have a big problem," she said. As he reached her, Khan swallowed thickly. He grunted. He forced his panting breaths into the patterns of speech. Khan's hands flexed impatiently, around the haft of Gorechild. The axe was never far away from his hands. He'd rather lay aside his limbs. "I do not have time for this." "Make time. Look, listen, damn you, Khan. Wake up. Look at what you've done," Latara bit back. Angron is rampaging through the thrall decks. Khan imagined taking her skull. She was physically weak, but her efforts had sent millions of men to their deaths. She would be a worthy offering to the brass throne. Blood. Angron spilled blood, and a voice in his head demanded to know why Khan did not. Latara took a step closer to him. Khan, listen to me," she snapped. "I am listening," he said, with difficulty. "I have an idea. The Nightfall. She was gabbling now. She had a limited period while Khan would remain calm.
The Night Lords,
he said dismissively. A few weeks ago, I received some intelligence, she said. From the 20th Legion. They told me that there is some kind of prison made for a Primarch on the Nightfall. If we can get them to take Angron, it'll keep him occupied for a while. Long enough until the time comes for him to land, she said. The Khan of old would have interrogated her as to how the Alpha Legion gave her this message, and why. But such finesse of thought was beyond him now. Lost under an ocean of blood.
How?
He said. It's all he could manage to say. You'll have to do it, she replied. She rubbed her hand over her face again. You'll have to do all of it. The arrogant dogs won't answer my request for communication, but they might listen to you. Khan acquiesced. My Lord Scrivok, the Painted Count, said Lotara, bowing towards the screen projection. The hololithic phantom of a youthful-looking space marine stood. He was unusually flamboyant in appearance for one of his kind. The long pale hair draped over his shoulders was more characteristic of Fulgrim's warriors than Kurza's, most striking with the vertical black ovals tattooed over his eyes, and the large sword strapped to his left side. Might I present to you the Lord Khan, equerry to the Primarch Angron, Master of the Eighth?
Yes, yes,
Scrivok interrupted, waving his hand.
Your minions relate all this. Besides, who would not recognize the great Khan? Such a reputation. My, 8th Captain Khan. What an unexpected pleasure.
I want a service from you, said Khan bluntly. This fool offended him. The butcher's nails pounded harder in his skull at the affront, but Khan managed, somehow, to keep his voice level.
First, tell me something, Painted Count. I have heard rumors about your vessel. Before we bargain, I must know whether they are true.
Scrivok's eyes narrowed.
That in your flagship is a prison for a Primarch.
The Painted Count smiled. Don't tell me. You're having trouble with your transcendent lord. Favored of God, or whatever this god's name is. I suppose that is what happens when one hearkens to gods. You wish me to take that monster aboard my vessel? He smiled condescendingly. My, what an interesting proposition. It is more than that. It is a labyrinth, designed by Perturabo himself to torment Vulcan. As you might imagine, it is ingenious and deadly in design. The Drake was one of the Emperor's more intelligent sons.
How do you know this? Growled Khan. How do I know that you speak the truth?
Mostly because I was put into it, said Scrivok.
You escaped,
said Khan.
You? Then it is not fit to hold a Primarch.
Scrivok smirked. It'll hold your Primarch. He is a mindless monster. I did escape, but I confessed I had help. The labyrinth will hold your lord. Not forever. I imagine all those little traps and dilemmas will slow him down, not at all, and he'll simply batter his way out. But it will occupy him for a time. How long? Asked Lotara. Long enough, said Scrivok. Khan walked cautiously through the mortal quarters. A slick, dry layer of blood covered nearly every inch. A mountain of corpses clung to the walls, most dying from the trampling and suffocation of the mass avoiding the monster. Khan unhooked the teleporter beacon and proceeded in a crouch with his axe ready. He did not need to fight to win, only long enough to tag his gene father with a device. Father, he called. Father, it is I, Khan. His amplified voice echoed through the dark hold.
Khan, Lord Khorne demands blood and skulls. Do you not hear his cries? Blood and skulls.
A guttural voice grew. I do not hear him, my lord. Khan lied.
You will. He values you, my son.
Heavy footsteps thumped deep in the stacks. Knocked chains jangled.
These slaves are unworthy offerings to the blood god. But you, Khan, your skull will make a fine gift.
Angron came out of nowhere. The enormous, winged red mass smashed into him. Khan parried the blow with a chain-axe Gorechild, and yet every bone in his body rippled.
I am the Avatar of Rage, the Red Angel screamed. The power of the warp runs through me, my son. I will not be chained like a dog any longer. Not by the Emperor, not by Horus, not by you. You are a fool to have come here. I will kill you. There will be blood, there will be skulls. Khorne cares not whence the blood flows. Khan leapt from the shadows, behind his demonic father, and sunk the teleporter into his leathery flesh. Angron howled, and sent Khan flying, his body smashing the blood-slick wall with a crunch. You have no honor, attacking from behind. Yellow eyes blazed. No true son of mine would stoop so low. We are warriors. Khan readied himself. His muscles burned. Gorechild shook in his weakened grip. Father, he said in a drool-soaked growl, I do not wish to fight you. You have no choice, Angron bellowed. There is only war. The black sword hurtled down. Khan could not block it. He knew, but he held Gorechild ready to deflect the blade, and prepared the blow he would land before he died. Lightning skittered all over the demon Primarch. Wisps of Corsporan streamed off his body in a white fog. Then, with a clap of air rushing suddenly into a vacuum, he was gone. Khan sunk to the floor. The last council of the Senatorum Imperialis was done before the invasion fleets arrived. Voluntarily, the Mortal Council had ceded control to the three Primarchs, yet the High 12 in particular still had great influence. It had been the Khan's idea to call them back together, just this once. A show of unity between men and demigods. Dawn, the Khan, Sanguinius and Constantine Valdor stood at the edge of the dais, slightly out of the light, allowing the council their moment of remembered authority. The Khan stepped forward, his presence making the mortal councillors unnerved. On a hollow display, the imagery taken from the Khan's bike and other White Scar incursions painted the view. The Dark Mechanicum siege camps, and their assembly of titanic siege cannons. This would take time, weeks or months. Perhaps enough time for Guilliman's armada to arrive. It was Malcador who stepped forward before Dawn could speak. Thus far, we have not seen Horus's infernal allies upon the field. We are fortunate. The Emperor is powerful and holds back the wickedness of the warp, but every drop of blood spilled on Terra's soil weakens his grip on the energies of the Inferion. Demons. The word was spoken around the councillors. The Emperor's power is not infinite, continued Malcador. Soon we will have to face the demonic creatures fighting alongside traitor forces. The looks and words expressed by the mortal councillors displayed their fear. Dawn stepped forward. His golden battleplate flashed resplendently, dazzling the High Lords. Although the dais raised the table well above the debating floor, Dawn was of sufficient height that he could meet their eyes when standing on the ground. There are further problems Urakan's reconnaissance has brought to light, Dawn said. You see structures here. Buildings, fortresses, the councillors began to discuss. Siege towers, said the Khan in disbelief. We have indications of others, said Dawn. Similar siege engines under construction in the other camps, but none so advanced as these. It is clear to us that soon the enemy will make an attempt on the walls, by the Helios Gate. The Aegis' strength held over the central palace, the mastermind of exploiting its weakness. One Dawn knew could only be Perturabo. 8 siege camps ring the city, all established behind defense screens. The Dark Mechanicum has begun their work to encircle the entire Eternity Wall. They are under constant bombardment from the palace, but this will only slow rather than stop them. The shielding preventing our direct targeting of their siege equipment until it is ready and moving against the walls. Dawn paused. Enemy troop strength. We have downed thousands of their landing craft. Nevertheless, several million troop of varying quality are now encamped outside the walls. However, these forces are of little concern. It didn't have to be spoken aloud. All knew the lost and the damned were occupying themselves with the rest of Terra. This is a ritual, said Constantine Valdor. The chief custody stepped forward. 8 camps at varying distance from the palace. Draw a line from each
and the lines intersect over the Sanctum Imperialis. These desperate attacks by low-quality troops against the outworks are not serious attempts. They are sacrifices, civil unrest, and now reports of rising disease since the Death Guard's appearance. It filled in the rest of the dark picture. The High Lords looked uncomfortably at one another. Dawn was leaving the responsibility of the citizenry to them. Mortals could help, but this was a war for the super soldier. The Emperor protects, one of the councillors muttered, quickly quieting with a glance by Dawn. The meeting ended, but not for the 3 Primarchs. Dawn's fury was evident. His brother's excursions outside the walls was useful, but they could have been killed. Did they not comprehend what that would do for morale alone? Dawn clenched his fists. Why will you not obey my orders? Why will you not put the safety of our fathers above your own impulses? Said Dawn.
We are different, you and I, said the Khan. I am sorry, my brother, but I am going to disappoint you again.
Dawn's usual face of cold steel became transfixed with fury.
Do not take your legion away, said Dawn. I forbid it.
You have known of my strategy since your return to the throne world, brother. Your objections are noted, but at this late stage, meaningless.
You shackle me to the palace with too short a chain, said the Khan. We fought the Great Crusade to free humanity, not to sacrifice it.
Dawn nodded once, though not in agreement. He rested his hand on his sword hilt. Chagatai, I understand. I feel your anguish that mortal men and women suffer to ensure our father's survival. But war is a calculation. This one more than all the others. Life cannot be measured in absolute terms any longer. Every death must be set against one consequence alone, said Dawn angrily.
The situation is fluid. Making the enemy change his plans is strength. Force your enemy to react to you. A general who waits for the enemy to act is already defeated. I learned this as a child.
Your wars were different to mine, said Dawn.
Then perhaps you should listen to me. Sanguinius, my brother and comrade, what do you see? Lend me your foresight.
Sanguinius shut his eyes.
Do you see me? What will be the consequences of inaction?
Asked the Khan. I see fire and blood, said Sanguinius, and a world laid rest if you do not act.
If I act?
Asked the Khan. There is grave risk to you, Sanguinius murmured.
But I save lives,
implored the Khan, and Sanguinius nodded. Many, he said.
That is what I was made for,
said the Khan, and he made to leave.
And I will ride out.
Perturabo wanted to be off the vengeful spirit. It reeked of slavery, and Perturabo was no one's slave, but he had to speak to his brother. Horus sat upon a throne at the far end of the walkway, which was fashioned of the same black, lustrous stone as the doors. He sprawled carelessly, armored legs thrust out in front of him. His hands on the screaming demon heads worked into the armrests. A penetrating sense of unease had Perturabo in its grip. The warp. It was here.
Brother,
said the War Master. It is good to see you. Perturabo hesitated. He should go to his brother, but caution held him back. It is unlike you to dither. Come to me and greet me. You have performed well. I wish to thank you. We have a great deal to discuss, said Horus. The Lord of Iron advanced steadily to mask his worries. Perturabo felt no fear, but he was paranoid to the core. He knelt before his War Master, though it burned his soul to submit. But such was the radiating dark power of the War Master. The image of a monster and a brother he knew flickered before Perturabo. You have waited too long to summon me, Perturabo said sourly. Why did you not allow me down with the Mechanicum landing parties? I have examined their work. It is pedestrian at best. You promise me honor and respect. Then leave me to languish in the outer systems digging ditches. We delay when we should strike. Horus silenced him. Perturabo's stolid face showed surprise as his words jammed in his throat.
Dear brother, Horus said. He rested his massive claw on Perturabo's shoulder. Perturabo's teeth and bones ached at the otherworldly power. Always looking for the poison in the meat, and never at the feast. I did not summon you until now for good reason. You see deviousness, when truthfully I set you to work as I do, because you are the only one of our brothers I trust. Be aware of this. You are blind to the affection I have for you. It offends me. You are too important to waste. Your sons too. They are valuable. Why would I send you down to bleed with the dregs? I have greater things in mind for you, said Horus. When have you ever cared for the lives of my sons, or for my talents? Whispered Perturabo. Horus looked at him pityingly. When have I not? You are the best of them, brother. This is a siege, it is a siege, Perturabo. There will never be another battle like this. You are the finest engineer in the galaxy. I protect my best assets. I preserve them for the right moment. You do not toss your advantage away. Then you finally acknowledge my worth, said Perturabo stiffly. Finally, said Horus. I have always acknowledged your worth. That is why I speak with you alone. The rest of our siblings must be dealt with together, like children, but not you. Bold, brave Perturabo. You will have your victory, and all the triumphs due you. When you accomplish the task I set you, every creature in the galaxy will know your name. All shall fear you. None shall doubt your brilliance. Perturabo was enraptured. Horus smiled, but there was no humanity in it. The Emperor is a liar, a booming voice spoke out across the walls. A floating island of sorcerer's bones swept the line. The voice of the Dark Apostle, Zardu Layak of the Word-Bearers, addressed the common people of Terra. You have all been deceived. He has lived amongst you for thousands of years, biding his time, using your ancestors as he uses you now. The Emperor speaks of unity. The Emperor speaks of protection for the species. The Emperor speaks of the furtherance of mankind. The Emperor speaks of many things, and all he says is lies. Know this, people of Terra. He is false. The War Master, great Horus, he has seen through his deceit, and he commands me to relay to you the truth of the Emperor's ambition. Grovel before the gods, and beg for their mercy, Layak demanded. Captain Ralderon and Thane continued to stare out at the foul sorcery. Munitions passed straight through it. Drops of rain plinked over Ralderon's battle plate, the few turning rapidly to many. It ran over his eye lenses, smearing the view. What is happening? Asked Thane. He held up a cupped palm. Only then did Ralderon see the drops of rain ran bright and crimson on Thane's yellow armor. A rain of blood, Ralderon said. A great howling split the sky. Then another, then a third. 3 streaks of lurid energy shot down from above, each displaying brief glimpses of howling faces. One by one they slammed down. More thunder rumbled. On the horizon, screeching horns blew. This is it, said Thane. The circling is over. The duel begins in earnest. There'll be a landing soon, said Ralderon, looking up into the bloody rain. Let us strike blood together, brother, said Thane. He held up his yellow gauntlet. Ralderon crashed his forearm against the Imperial fists. Dawn himself spoke then, a message that went to every helm, vox bead and address system in the palace. The time has come. The time for speeches is done. The first great test is here. My orders to you all is simple, yet heed it well, and exert yourselves to see it done. They are coming. Kill them all. Katsuhiro ran. Sheets of blood rained from the sky, mixing with the ash and mud and nearly dragging him down. The poisonous gases of the Death Guard had returned.
as well as a wave of streaking fire and blasts that made the previous months look like nothing. The outer aegis was failing. The moment had come. Huge chimneys and the motive units of the siege towers belched green smoke. Wheels 10 times the height of men churned up the ground, and the massive constructs lurched forward towards the walls. Katsuhiro ran. Even the veterans ran, abandoning their posts in a state of detachment. Weeks of horror had numbed Katsuhiro's soul. The pathways of his body raged with adrenaline that muzzled his consciousness and pushed him only to survive. Blood was in his eyes and in his nostrils and mouth. Tears streamed down his face. Without realizing, Katsuhiro had run to the tunnel entrance he had seen on patrol, and the smallest well of hope filled him in the cacophony of violence. He stumbled through the damp mud tunnel, not caring where it led. His foot rolled on a corpse and he nearly fell. Stumbling probably saved his life, for it prevented him from blundering into the dead man's murderers. Around the corner, dim red light shone, and he heard voices. He crept forwards, not daring to breathe. It was Doromek and the woman, Ms. "Do you ever question why we are doing this?" Doromek said. Katsuhiro could barely make out their conversation. He dared not move lest they murder him, as he now realized they murdered Runakan. He had been right. They knew each other. Spies. For the War Master. Katsuhiro wondered in his panic. They looked to be arguing or conferring. He did not know. Finally, Doromek extended his hand to Ms. "Alpha to Omega," she said. "Alpha to Omega," Doromek replied. Katsuhiro waited for the next earth-shaking detonation and slipped away before they could kill him. Lukofrius could no longer deny it. His right foot had become the image of a bird's talon. The Night Lord's apothecarians could do nothing for him, or those of the Raptor discipline. The very Legion was mutating. He looked around at the shaking crew compartment. The Raptors seemed like Night Lords, until one looked closer. The helms of some had been refashioned, with a distinctly bird-like aspect. Lukofrius stood. He drew his weapons as he walked down the aisle to the prow, trying to suppress his growing limp. His armor whined at his awkward movements. Sometimes he thought it would be more comfortable to run on all fours. "Brothers," he voxed his command. "We fly, first to the wall, first to the blood. Ave Dominus Noctem." The others were rising, as Lukofrius ignited his jets. He ran from the prow and leapt into the maelstrom of fire. 30 raptors followed him, bright comets of exhaust joining the flare and flash of war. The Night Lords were often called cowards, but not today. Today they would be the first on the walls. Lukofrius slammed into a mortal, crushing their breastplate and crunching their body to paste. More crashed around him as Blood Angels and Imperial Fists sprinted along the walkways to meet their cousins. Lukofrius' heart pounded with the scale of his achievement. He raised his arms and shouted into the sky, "Mino Premrish a Minos Morandiath," he cried in Nostraman. "We are the first on the wall." He gathered his warriors and ordered them to secure the landing zone. Scrivok was coming. Gendor Scrivak marched out with a confident swagger, his hand gripping the hilt of his sheathed war blade. He surveyed his troops from the top of the ramp, before joining his Atramentar Terminator guard. His chronometer told him it was day, but the world was deep in a war gloom as black as any Nostraman noon. Night suited him perfectly. The Night Lords had plenty of things, but what Scrivok wanted was glory, and there was plenty below. "Captain!" Thane's voice penetrated the fog of Raldoron's mind. Raldoron shook himself out of the fugue. They were under attack from all quarters. "The Night Lords to the south of the gate have reinforced, and are moving to our position," Thane voxed. "The siege towers are closing. 2 to the north gate, 1 to the south. The Aegis has collapsed across the entire front of our section." Raldoron surveyed the wall top. It had taken the enemy minutes to sweep the rampart free of defenders, secure their landing zone, then bring in more troops. "We do not have enough warriors to hold the walls against this attack," said Raldoron. The macro cannon on the gate tower roared,
shaking him to his core. Take one in every 2 men from sections 12, 13, 14, 17 and 18. I shall provide you with my authorization coding. He blink-clicked an icon to send the data key over to Thane's warsuit. Target their heavy armor and their terminators. Your legion is the holder of gates, said Raldoron. He looked south again. The Night Lords were close enough for him to pick out their heraldry. Night Lords are an insignificant threat to the Blood Angels. I shall give our guests below a warm welcome they will not forget quickly, said the first captain. The Night Lord's ships were never ending, deploying the murderers directly onto the walls. When the foe were 40 meters away, Raldoron held aloft and ignited his power sword. Timing was all. They must charge first. Drop shields, he shouted. Charge! 100 veteran Blood Angels roared out their battle cry. For Sanguinius, for the Emperor, and the ramparts shook to their thunder of their ceramite. Ilar Shovorath. The Night Lord officers shouted through their voxmeters. Advance. The Night Lords gave a wordless shout, and set themselves hard behind their shields. Arranged as a giant, pressing scrum, the two legions smashed into each other. Blood and ceramite sent flying as superhumans killed each other. The Blood Angels held, until Raldoron roared to split. Pounding treads rocketed from behind the red wave, as Blood Angel Contemptor dreadnoughts barreled into the Night Lord's shield walls. Armoured blue warriors were sent flying. My lord, growled Scrivox Atramentar Sergeant, we must take you to a place of safety. What? Now, at the moment of my triumph, Scrivox scoffed. When the word of my deed reaches the War Master, I will be rewarded with power and riches. If I depart now, I will be known as nothing but a coward. The leader. Another of his escort raised his combi bolter, sighting it on a veteran captain whose armor was encrusted with high honors. Scrivox put his hand on top of the Terminator's gun and pushed it down. He is mine, he said. I want him. I want it to be known that I killed the captain of this gate myself. Scrivox pushed forward into the fray. His Ashamentar followed behind. Blood Angel, Scrivox yelled joyfully. Face me. The Blood Angel finished his opponent and turned to face the Night Lord. Upon his left pauldron, his name was emblazoned across a scroll plate. Raldoron, said Scrivox. I am Gendor Scrivox, the Painted Count, Lord Commander of the Night Lord's Legion, and I am your end. The Blood Angel was unimpressed. Never heard of you, he said, and came in to attack. But Raldoron's attacks were parried with ease, and at such speed it shocked the Blood Angel. The duel looked like a sure victory, until Scrivox's attacks became sluggish. The demon within his sword had deserted him. No, said Scrivox. It cannot be. Raldoron's power sword banged against the edge of Scrivox's blade, sending him stumbling backwards. That is always the problem with your legion. You are quick with your torturous knives, but so few of you are worthy warriors. Raldoron's power sword slashed across Scrivox's chest, breaking open the ceramite and severing his power cabling. The Painted Count fell back and began crawling. Wait, the Painted Count said. I give you my surrender. You beat me. I am your prisoner. There can be no prisoners in this war, said Raldoron. How much mercy have you shown to all those you harmed? I have as much mercy for you as you had for them. Now, get off my wall. Raldoron raised his bolt pistol. Screaming in defiance, Scrivox shoved himself over the edge, reaching terminal velocity long before he hit the ground, and the stone broke him. A broken man in broken armor stirred at the foot of the wall, a single casualty among thousands. Gendor Scrivox was dying. The fall had brought him down across a lump of rockcrete, and his back had shattered on it. He could move his arms. Everything below his shoulders were useless. Blood pooled underneath him and began bubbling up in his throat. Gendor Scrivox did not wish to die. Demon, he whispered. The blade began to fizz, boiling off into black smoke that fled upwards toward the flaring sky. No, he said. No, demon, wait. Do not desert me. I have not deserted you, Gendor Scrivox. Not yet. The demon came fully formed, solid as a man of flesh and blood. It was a scrawny thing, with skin covered in tumorous lumps.
Its head had something of the equine to it, being long, with eyes set far back into the side of its face. Scrivok whimpered. "Why did you leave me on the wall?" said Scrivok. "Because I could," it said. Its voice was that of a predator. "Because you needed a lesson. I made you strong, Scrivok, and you assumed that strength was your own. You are a traitor and a murderer. Ruthless and a little cunning are your only gifts. But you mistook my talents for yours. Can you imagine? The painted count thought himself the equal of the first captain of the Blood Angels. A priceless error. What do you want of me?" Scrivok said. His life was ebbing away. Not long now. He almost welcomed it. "You can offer yourself to me, wholeheartedly. I will take you into myself. You will become part of me, and I will become part of you. Together we shall live forever. I pledge myself to you. I shall become yours. You will be me, and I will be you. Is that right? Please do not let me die." The demon chuckled. "Did I mention," said the demon into his mind, for the mind was now its too, "that for you to deliver pain correctly, you must learn what pain is? I will take you now into the warp, where for 6 times 666 years, you will learn the depths of agony." Scrivok's body convulsed, then vanished. In the depths of the warp, Gendor Scrivok began to scream. It hit the ground, sending out a billow of flame that raced over traitor and loyalist alike. "Father!" roared the giant. His furious, brazen voice was empowered by the violence, thundering louder than any cannonade and audible over the racket of battle. "I have come for you!" The Nightfall was a prison designed to hold a Primarch, but no bars could hold back the Red Angel of Khorne. Surrounded by flames, Katsuhiro did not see Angron fall from the sky, but he heard his call, and he saw the things the fallen Primarch summoned. He was a creature of rippling crimson skin and leathery wings. It was rage incarnate, and Katsuhiro felt his blood boil with hate just at the sight of it. The World Eaters came loping from the fire with their chainswords, and set about their grisly work. They butchered men and women, hacking skulls from the dead and living alike. "Blood and skulls! Blood for the Blood God!" the giant howled. Katsuhiro and the surviving conscripts ran towards the walls, their lungs burning from exhaustion. Katsuhiro saw the desperate legionaries battle upon the walls, and knew he and all below were abandoned, meat to slow the raging death on their heels. Then a miracle occurred. Multi-throated horns sang orchestral war cries, and the Helios Gate began to open. "Loyal men and women of the Imperium," a great amplified voice boomed from the gate. "Look now to your salvation. Make your way into the Emperor's protection. You have 3 minutes." Katsuhiro cried, and sprinted towards salvation. Chain-teeth growled past Raldron's face. With a hair's breadth to spare, he leaned back and slashed down with his power sword, cutting the axe head from the World Eater's weapon. The traitor legionary slammed a fist into Raldron's face, knocking his helmet into his cheek. Raldron jammed his bolt pistol into the neck joint of his foe's armor and pulled the trigger, emptying the ammunition clip. The World Eaters were scaling the walls, reinforcing the few Night Lords left on the rampart. They fought with astounding savagery, with no thought for tactics or self-preservation. They were just berserk. "Finish them!" Raldron voxed. "Get them off the walls!" The Blood Angels and Imperial fists desperately cut back, blood and gore multiplying. Raldron peered over the violence. The first siege tower was mere meters away, the noxious gas and blood mixing in a pollutant tide. Raldron heard the thundering creak. Thane, he voxed. "The gates are opening. Angron is outside. Thane, on whose authority do the gates open? Are we betrayed?" There was a rush of air behind him, and the thump of boots upon the stone. He turned to see Sanguinius aloft on the wall, sword drawn in his left hand, the spear of Telesto in his right. "The gate opened by my authority, Captain." Sanguinius strode to Raldron's side. "I will not abandon the human troopers to this vile death, while some might be saved. In them I see bravery, I see loyalty, but above all, I see faith in my father's vision. I shall not let them die, while there is blood in my body and strength in my limbs. Fear not, my son, I do not die today." "For the Emperor!" called Sanguinius, and led his sons into the fray. Katsuhiro rushed past the wall of amber armor, led by Captain Thane. Whistling bolts flew past his head, as the blood-crazed traitor legionaries were mere meters behind him. Katsuhiro turned to look towards the palace. To his amazement, a group of titans were advancing down the main road towards the Helios Gate. Green and red and white, they blew their war horns in outraged cries. They sang their war songs once again, and the largest spoke. "The Emperor protects," it said, and opened fire. Laz weaponry of a scale that dumbfounded Katsuhiro cast double spears of hard light at the enemy horde. They both hit the rampaging giant Angron, throwing him back and splashing into the horde of traitor troops. The enemy was streaming for the open gate, but were annihilated, and the survivors began retreating in disarray. The diseased siege camps clamped down. A bloated array of death guards surged, but they were slow, bloated by sickness, disabled by infirmities. The Blood Angels moved with a grace that their counterparts could not match, and found hard to counter. Just as much stinking blood was spilled as pure. Legionary vitae stained everything, but the line held. Sanguinius leapt at one of the towers. He slew the Death Guard with such speed and power that all that came against him died. With blasts from his spear and the sweeps of his great sword, he ended their treachery once and for all. He leapt from the wall to the drawbridge, knocking as many foes from the edge as he slaughtered directly. Then, having cleared a space, he leapt. He beat his wings and then flew up. Sanguinius was captivated by the sight of his brave sons holding back the tide. Such pride stirred in him at their sacrifice, such sorrow that he would behold their valor only a few more times, before the final act of his life played out. He turned towards the thundering titans, waving to signal the god machines. The titans advanced outside the Helios Gate, each step sending shockwaves through the ground as they turned. Giant lasbeams slammed into the siege towers. The corrupted constructs, though bigger than the titans, burned through. Warp-infused bronze melting and exploding with hellish fire. Scalding fluid blasted out in every direction, and the towers shook, spilling the tiny figures of battling space marines from its broad ramp. Chained explosions raced up from its many floors, blasting flames from its firing slits and windows. Magazines caught, energy sources detonated. Radaron grabbed the standard from a dead banner bearer and waved it over his head. The tattered flag snapped beneath the winged blood-dropped finial. "To me, sons of Sanguinius, to me!" he called down from on high. Sanguinius, most perfect of all Primarchs, still hurtled into the middle of the Death Guard, and the Blood Angels roared as they began to push them back. Death Guard, Night Lords and World Eaters all plummeted towards their death. A dark shape grew suddenly from the sky. Angron was flying straight at them, but Sanguinius stood firm. His demonic brother was sent flying. The Emperor's wards were weakening, and soon the Neverborn would walk upon Terra. But for now, even Angron could not enter the palace. "Sanguinius," growled Angron. "Face me, let us fight, you and I." "You shall not pass over these walls," said Sanguinius, "nor under or through them until our father decrees it. You know this to be true." Angron snarled. "Then come out and fight me, Red Angel to Red Angel, upon this field of battle where father can no longer interfere." Sanguinius simply saluted his brother, as if Angron remained the troubled warrior of before. "We will fight, my brother, but not today." Angron roared and wheeled around, for he must have seen the truth in the great angel's words. He did not make another attempt to pass over the wall, and flew back to the burning plains below. where the last of the unfortunate few of the Outwork defenders were being hunted down. The battle was over. The ground rumbled as the Titan strode back through the Helios gate. Katsuhiro stared as the gates closed. Transhumans moved all around the square behind the gatehouse. Now combat was done. They went about rearmament and repair, without the post-combat shock of lesser humans. "Please, my lord," Katsuhiro said, reaching up his hands. He expected to be ignored, but the captain stopped at his cot and looked down on him. "Why did you save us?" Katsuhiro whispered. "We were ordered to," said the Space Marine. Then you think it a waste of resources," Katsuhiro muffled. "I do not blame you. I am a coward. Every time I think I have overcome my fear, then some fresh horror is revealed, and I am a coward all over again. The city was put in danger for our sake. I am sorry. Hear me, son of Terra. Not one of you who fought upon those lines is a coward. You did what you were asked to. You performed your duty. I am proud to call you my comrade in arms. Whatever the cost in blood, and the risk of bringing you within these walls, this I, Maximus Thane, swear to you. Now rest. You'll be needed again." The Space Marine walked away. A Medicae orderly came to Katsuhiro and pushed him back gently into his cot, but Katsuhiro saw something behind Thane's huge, yellow bulk that made him sit up. That man, stop him!" A soft plastic mask was pulled over Katsuhiro's face. He struggled against the hands pushing him down. Thane moved on, calling to his men, revealing Doromek, the traitor. Stop him," Katsuhiro muttered, already losing consciousness. Doromek saluted ironically, as Katsuhiro's eyelids shut, and consciousness left him. The air was foul in Horus's nameless sanctum, where Abaddon watched over his father. As always, Layak and his tongueless servants had followed him there, giving him no moment of peace.
"He spends too much time in his meditations,"
said the first captain. Horus's eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. His mouth gaped. He looked an imbecile or dead. Abaddon was glad few others saw the War Master like this. He wished he did not see it himself, but he could not stop looking.
"How do you think that Angron walks on Terra?"
said Layak mildly.
"He will not be the first child in the warp to do so. The Emperor's might dwindles because Horus confronts him in the warp. Without these attacks your father makes upon the Terran despot, our allies would never break through.
Erebus would have claimed those triumphs for himself."
I am not Erebus. The first apostle served himself first, and the gods second. That is why the War Master banished him. He and Lorgar were faithless in the end.
"What about you, Layak? Do you keep faith?"
he said dismissively. A burst of angry heat radiated from the apostle.
I serve only the gods. For what use is mortal power in the face of eternity?
Abaddon stared at the War Master.
"The price of this is too high. We can bring the Emperor down without the Neverborn. I do not like what these sorcerous journeys are doing to my father, and I hold you responsible."
Kill me, and it will make no difference. It is too late to change the War Master's path. The deal has been struck. The demonic legions wait to add their might to yours. There is no going back on that.
"We could have obliterated this world."
Then you would have lost. The Emperor is no ordinary foe. Slay his body, and he will persist. He must be destroyed, face to face, in body and in spirit.
"And we should have tried it on our own. If Horus continues with this harassment of the false Emperor, he risks himself. Do not underestimate the power of the Emperor, Layak. I do not. Do your masters?"
Layak did not answer Abaddon's question.
There are pressures upon our labors. They must be completed quickly, or the war will be lost.
Abaddon looked at the Mars priest.
Such as? Guilliman is nothing. I will break him. I will break them all. These loyal sons, these Primarchs, they are weak.
Layak's 6 eyes flared.
Do you believe that Guilliman's advance is the only limit of our time?
Layak, I have no liking for you. You are useful, and Horus has decreed that you are not to be harmed, but I would require little excuse to overlook both these protections you enjoy.
I will say what needs to be said, threats or not. I serve the gods. My life means nothing.
Abaddon's fists flexed.
Then if you are so faithful, I dare you to speak, and we will see what affection the gods hold you in.
You have seen it. You can sense it. Horus is failing. He is too strong to defeat. But it may be that he is too weak to claim victory. The Pantheon gifted him with great ability, but the favor of the gods carries a steep price.
Speak clearly.
Horus's soul is bright with divine might, but it burns. Mighty as his being is, it is finite. He is not invincible in this world or the other. If we delay too long, he will be devoured by the power he commands.
Abaddon did not want to recognize it. He could not. But he knew, looking at his father's blank face, that what Layak said was true.
How long does he have?
Long enough, perhaps. His will is strong.
But if it is not strong enough, if he fails now, if his soul burns out before the task is done, what will happen?
Then, my lord, what happens will be what has always happened before.
Layak looked at Abaddon.
There shall come another champion of chaos.